Well, I'm George Steele. I'm a lifelong Detroiter, Detroit area. Not many people are actually from the city of Detroit anymore. And I've always been fascinated with casinos, his history of casinos, and probably like all of us are. So I was always very interested in following the inception of the Detroit casinos and how they started and where they are today. It really is a study in modern gaming. What happened was, somehow I got unplugged here. Uh-oh. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to restart this one for some reason.
Start slideshow.
Well, I don't know where the slide shows. Well, it was working and now it isn't working. I gotta make this thing work. Does anybody know anything about computers? I don't know.
You may need to hit slideshow to get it.
You may have to hit just like an arrow button here.
Yeah, better.
Somehow you have to find, like he said, there's a slideshow thing somewhere.
In the toolbar.
Look on the bottom. You see how he had like that yellow box on the bottom right hand corner? One of those is a slideshow. I think maybe hit the blue arrow. No, on the very up.
Oh, here.
Yeah, hit that, and then maybe it'll.
Or you can.
Yeah, I'll do it from right here.
But one of these buttons here
Yeah, one
will
of
put you in the slot. I think it's this one.
That's okay,
I
this
think
one.
it's this
Yeah.
one. And then you can use your pointer.
There you go.
There it is.
There we go.
All right. See, I am useful.
There it is. Well, the way casinos started, the modern casinos, is it had to have a referendum from the city of Detroit. They had two proposals before 1994, and they both failed. It wasn't popular. The churches didn't like it. They didn't think it would do anything good for the city. I'm not sure where they thought this paradise was that was going to be defiled by casinos, but it was just very unpopular. But finally, in August of 1994, there was money behind the ballot proposal. They got enough signatures, they put it on the ballot, and the city of Detroit approved 2 casinos. But they had to go to the state for approval, and the governor Arnold said no. He didn't want casinos in Detroit. And that was really the end of it. So all this effort to get these referendum passed in Detroit essentially failed because Governor Engler didn't want casinos. So they got a lot of money behind it. They put a statewide ballot this time to see if they could do it. It required state approval. So you had a ballot proposal that authorized 3 casinos, and they were bankrolled. They gave preference to Circus Circus, who bankrolled the Detroit referendum, and also the Motor City Casino, which was owned by the Chippewa tribe of Indian tribe in Michigan. So they thought, the Circus Circus and the tribe thought, well, we better authorize 3 casinos, because if we can get an opportunity for a 3rd casino, we'll probably have a lot more money coming in to help with the campaign to have state approval. So it was approved by the state, and proposals were due for the casinos in July of 1997. Now at that time there were preferences. The Circus Mirage was going to get a preference, and Greektown was going to get a preference. But the ballot that everybody voted for was so confusing, and nobody really knew what they were voting for, other than we're going to have casinos. So when the proposals were going to become due, there was a big stink about who was going to be able to have any preference, if any. The people that didn't have preferences thought it was very unfair, but of course, Circus and the Indian tribe thought it was very fair because they did all the work to get this thing on the ballot and have it passed. The proposals were due in July 1997, and the selections were to be decided by the mayor of Detroit and the city council of Detroit. Tremendous amount of power for these people. The mayor at the time was Dennis Archer. Now, Detroit was very, very fortunate to have Dennis Archer as the mayor when all of this was going on. Because the mayor and the city council were going to be the people that were going to decide where the casinos were going to be, how big they were going to be, all kinds of different things. And Dennis Archer was a very prominent attorney in Detroit. He was a state bar president of the state of Michigan. And he was the president of the American Bar Association. He was also on the Michigan Supreme Court. Very credentialed individual, very, very honest. Detroit was very, very fortunate to have him reigning over the committee that was going to ultimately decide where the casinos would be and who would be awarded the casinos. This fellow, if you're from Detroit, you may recognize him. If you're not from Detroit, you still will recognize him. This is Gil Hill. Gil Hill was the president of the council. And because the casino decisions were going to be made by the mayor and the council, both Dennis Archer and Gil Hill were going to be very important in deciding the proposals and granting the license for casinos. Anybody recognize him?
Yeah, the movie.
There you go. He was in Beverly Hills Cop. Now, Gil Hill was the head of the homicide division of Detroit Police Force. Well-liked individual, tough as nails. Imagine being head of homicide. And the way he was kind of a consultant for the production of the Beverly Hills Cop. He wasn't an actor or anything like that. But what happened, they were filming a scene at the Detroit Police Department. The movie was filmed a lot in Detroit. And you might remember the scene where Eddie Murphy had got busted. He tried to do a sting operation with a bunch of cigarettes and sell them to people, and kind of went haywire. The cops were chasing him. He was in the back of the cigarette truck that carried a bunch of cigarettes in it. And there was a big chase scene through the city of Detroit. It was fantastic. And we have Inspector Todd in the movie and Eddie Murphy here, where Todd is looking for Murphy just to chew him out. So they were filming the scene, and there was an actor that came down and did it, and Eddie Murphy came up to Gil Hill and said, well, how was that? Was it, I think that went to, and Gil Hill said, listen, I don't know anything about Hollywood, but I know a lot about the Detroit Police Department, and that scene was just nothing like the real thing. But Eddie Murphy said, well, you know what, why don't you try it? So Gil Hill did the scene, and they scrapped all the other filming of the fellow that had played Inspector Todd, substituted for Gil Hill, and he played him in all three Beverly Hills movies. You might remember the scene where he was looking for Foley. He dropped about 15 F-bombs, and he came down and really chewed out Eddie Murphy. It's a classic scene, and he got a lot of praise from Detroit, except he was very embarrassed by the language that he used in it because he was really a clean-cut fellow. That's Paul Reiser there on the right. But it's a superb scene in Beverly Hills Cop. Haven't you ever seen it? One of the big impetuses for the casinos in Detroit in 1994, when they ultimately were granted licenses, was that Windsor, just across the river, had just built a big casino. It was owned by the province of Ontario. It was run by Caesars. And it was very, very popular. And the Detroit people felt that their money was going to be siphoned off into Canada. So that helped a great deal in getting the proposals passed. and the running of the casinos. We're lucky we had Dennis Archer because this was the replacement. Kwame Kilpatrick became the mayor after Dennis Archer. And Kwame Kilpatrick was kind of a rising star, a young fellow in Detroit, was in the mayor's office a couple of years, and the reason we're very fortunate to have Dennis Archer do all of the casino stuff is because Kwame Kilpatrick was convicted of 15 felonies of corruption while he was mayor of the state of Detroit, and he's been 28 years now in penitentiary. The next mayor after Kwame Kilpatrick went to jail was another fellow you probably recognize, even if you're not from Detroit. And that's Dave Ding. Dave Ding was a Hall of Fame NBA player for the Detroit Pistons. He became the mayor of Detroit. And it wasn't just because of his basketball notoriety. Bing was a very, very successful businessman in the city of Detroit. He ran a big steel company, he played a lot of people, and he was very popular. And he did some raid over the casinos as well. Dave Bing ran into a lot of trouble later on, which I'll talk about. Once the casino proposals were granted and the people in Detroit were recognizing casinos and recognized that the mayor and the city council were going to determine what they would be, there was all kinds of money spent and all kinds of money to be made. There were all kinds of lawsuits. People felt that the investors had sold too many shares of stock in a company that was more than 100% ownership. There was questions as to who had the rights for making bids on the proposal to get granted casino licenses. So all of the attorneys in Detroit did very well. All the investors in Detroit wanted to clamor to join teams that were going to propose casinos. Now, there were going to be 3 of them. And there were a bunch of proposals. So people figured, boy, if I can get on some company and be an investor, and my company gets the award at the casino, there'd be a lot of money to be made. There were a bunch of proposals, and they were like a lot of money that were bankrolled. We had, this is the Chippewa tribe. This was Greektown, which was very well funded by the Indians and local investors. Isle of Capri had a bunch of casinos around that you're familiar with. Magic Star Casino, that was a Don Barden entrepreneur fellow that got a bunch of investors together and made a bid. And he had some experience in casino operations because he ran a riverboat casino. Of course, the MGM Grand was extremely well funded, and they had a bunch of local investors too. Mirage was involved. Steve Wynn wanted to expand and come to Detroit, and they made a presentation. The Rio made a presentation, and they combined with local people like everybody else did. And Donald Trump was one of the other ones that came into the bidding wars. If you look at let me see. Donald Trump, he teamed up with a local fellow, Mel Farr, an auto dealer. Mel Farr was a black entrepreneur in Detroit. He got a Ford dealership in the middle of Detroit and actually did very well. Mel Farr was a professional football player for the Detroit Lions, so he was very popular. So he went with Trump's money. And every one of these people had a connection with Detroit. They had radio personalities, businessmen, members from the church, anybody that was in Detroit that was prominent, had money. This is a who's who of people that joined with the big money establishments to see if they could have their proposal accepted to run the casino and hopefully make a lot of money. The local investors were heavily black. When the proposals were made, everybody that was making a proposal wanted to let Detroit know that they had a lot of black employees, a lot of black investors, hired black contractors. They felt obviously that this would help gain favor with the mayor and the city council. And of course, the city is predominantly black. And the black investors, they were, of the individuals, like 70–80%. But you got to remember, they only had a small portion of the bankrolled money that was necessary if they were going to get a franchise. Don Barden is one of the most interesting ones. Don Barden was a kind of an entrepreneur, and he had some small businesses, and he tried a bunch of different things. And when the cable expansion was going on in Detroit, southeastern Michigan, he got a franchise from Coleman Young, the mayor of Detroit at that time, to run a cable franchise in the city of Detroit and some of the surrounding suburbs. It wasn't very desirable because nobody wanted to lay the cable for the television. They felt that people in Detroit weren't going to pay the bills or wouldn't subscribe, and they didn't think it was a good business adventure. But what Don Barden thought was, he said, no, I'll get the people signed up, and he felt that he had a pretty good system because if somebody didn't pay their cable bills, he could just shut them off. So he always did, he had an income flow, and he grew his business. And after about 5 years, he sold it and made $100 million on it. So he invested in some casinos, and he was one of the prime movers for the referendum in the city of Detroit. And he thought that he should get preferential treatment. Now, he hooked on with some people, but he eventually did not get a casino license. And of course, there were a bunch of lawsuits over that as well. But Don Barden eventually had a part ownership in one of the casinos. It was only about 3 or 4%. And he sold that for about $5 million. And then he had a lawsuit against the people that he was supposed to have been involved with that he felt shortchanged him on some of the investments that ultimately did receive the casino licenses, and he got $35 million for that. He parlayed all of that money into, he bought the Fitzgerald's downtown casino, and he put some money into that. After he died, his estate sold the Fitzgerald to a couple of brothers in Detroit who knew the family, the Barden family. And of course, they changed it to the D with a somewhat of a Detroit theme where the old Fitzgerald was. All of these people that were with the large companies all did very well. Trump was in the game, Mirage was out. Trump and Wynn have always had kind of a feud. Now they're kind of friends together, but they feuded tremendously in Atlantic City. And they thought there was going to be a big challenge between Trump and Wynn in getting a Detroit casino. Wynn didn't think he should go into Detroit. He kind of gave in to Trump. And I don't know if this is true or not, but they heard that Trump was boasting a bit about Mirage backing out. Trump was very sure that he was going to get a casino in Detroit. So Steve Wynn came back in, and he was ultimately granted the casino. There were 4 finalists. The Circus, the Greek Town, which is Indian tribe, the MGM, and the Mirage. Now, Steve Wynn came in, and he made a lot of proposals, but he didn't connect with anybody from Detroit. He did it all by himself. And that probably didn't gain much favor with the city council and the mayor of Detroit because they ultimately didn't give him the one. So they gave the casinos to Circus, the Greeks, and then MGM. So you got to understand, we've got this approval, we got the finalists, we've got the selection made, we know there's going to be 3 casinos. And there was so much to do. They had to have a Michigan Gaming Control Board. These are a bunch of people appointed by the governor. No experience at all in running casinos, none whatsoever. But there were people of integrity, and they hired people that they figured would know what to do and could guide them. There was a lot of screening of the owners, and this caused a lot of lawsuits because as people were investing in these 3 casinos that ultimately got the franchises, a lot of them couldn't pass muster with the ethics panel, and some people had things in their past, and so there was a lot of trouble in screening all of the owners to whether or not they should allow to be major investors in the casinos. These would be the local Detroit people. There was certainly no problem with MGM or the Indian tribe or the people running the Motor City Casino. They had to decide how they were going to do the taxes, revenue sharing, where they were going to be, and approvals. Now, it's astounding work for a group of people that were running a city and coordinating with the Michigan Gaming Control Board. And this was all new to everybody. And they consulted with people from Atlantic City, tried to avoid mistakes they made. They were getting all kinds of advice. It was amazing that things filtered down to actually get the rules and regulations. It's 189 pages, and it's pretty specific. And it really has been a model for running casinos and working with the city and the Gaming Control Board. There was all kinds of issues about where the casinos were going to go, how big they were going to have to be, how many employees they have, how many would be from the city of Detroit, how much the tax burden would be on the casinos, and how much money the city would get, and how much money the state of Michigan would get. So all of this was done in a relatively short period of time, surprisingly. And things did settle down. Finally, they opened 3 temporary casinos. The temporary casinos were really well done. They were attractive, they're functional, they really didn't have to cut corners. One rented a little building that was no longer used. They brought everything in. And to tell you how much eagerness they had in opening these casinos, the MGM, they took a space from an old tax building in Detroit. And in 21 weeks, they had a casino running, and they built a 7-story parking garage for 3,500 cars in 21 weeks. You couldn't get the permits in that period of time now. But money was to be made, and they didn't want to delay. Motor City Casino put their casino in an old bread factory. If you were from Detroit, you would go down the freeway. There was this Wonder Bread factory that always smelled beautifully because of the cooking bread. It'd been empty for 20 years. Motor City bought that, developed it, put their temporary casino there. Greektown did the same. They were up and running pretty quickly, except for Greektown. They were ready to open the doors, but they had so much trouble getting the ownership approval. There's about 13 Indian casinos in the state of Michigan, but they're not run by the state. They're run by the federal government. So nobody in Michigan had any experience with them. And the background checks for the Indian casinos, or the Indian casino owners, were much different than the background checks for people that were private investors. So they had a lot of trouble getting approval and actually sat ready to go for 3 or 4 months. And finally, in November, they were able to open their temporary casino. Now all the permanent casinos are done. This is the MGM Grand in Detroit. It's, you would know it, it's different from any other casino here. It's the same glitch you have in Las Vegas. Have all the same games. There's no sports book, but all the other games are pretty much the same. About the size, it's about 100,000 square feet. South Point's 80,000 square feet. And of course, the MGM Grand is about 175,000 square feet of gaming space. But it's a large casino, and it handles a bunch of people. They've got probably 8 nice tables, and they got the same amount of table games and slot machines as most of the casinos in Las Vegas. This was built in an area somewhat out of the way. It's not your downtown Detroit. One of the proposals was that all of the casinos would be built in the Detroit riverfront. There was a lot of enthusiasm for that because the thought was if you could have the casinos somewhat near one another, it would encourage traffic and building out, and it would revitalize an area of Detroit that was an industrial area that would had been beautiful on the Detroit River. But that never worked out because there was so much contamination in the river. So regrettably, what happened was all these casinos were built in different places. The Greek town was downtown Detroit. This MGM Grand is way off the beaten path. I mean, you couldn't walk to it from downtown Detroit. Motor City Casino is also in a kind of a remote area. Again, you couldn't walk there from downtown Detroit. But it has all the modern trappings of the other casino. It's about the same size as the MGM. Greektown is downtown, and it gets a lot of foot traffic, if anybody's going to get any foot traffic, because the Greektown, Detroit is an area of a few blocks that was, Greek oriented at one time. Now it's called Greektown because there are some Greek restaurants there, but that's about it. But it is in the city. You could walk to a Detroit Tiger game or a Lions game and walk downtown from the Greektown Casino. If you walked in any one of those casinos, you wouldn't know one from another. Very much like Las Vegas. They all look the same from the inside. I mean, they're not the win. I mean, that's the exception. That is a beautiful, gorgeous, unbelievable casino. But the next level down is where the Detroit casinos are. Interesting, they have poker at the Motor City Casino. Last year, they had the largest bad beat jackpot won by any casino in the United States. It was over $1 million. And it's incredible it got that high. Anybody that plays poker, the jackpots never get that high. The loser, which got the bad beat, got $470,000. And the person that won got so much that it split amongst the other people. 4 threes lost to 4 nines. Best loss he ever had. There was hope that the casinos originally on would spawn a lot of restaurants, retail, housing, condominiums, and that type of thing. In fact, in every one of the proposals that were made by the people who were going to spend the money, they all boasted that this was going to revitalize Detroit, which was in a horrible shape. And we thought that that was going to be the case, that and we hoped if they were in an enclave that could grow in a particular area. And when they were all spaced apart, we thought, well, maybe these areas will grow. This is Carl's Chop House. If you're from Detroit, you would know Carl's Chop House. This is the best, in my view, steakhouse right across the street from the Motor City Casino. Right across the street. My friend and I used to go, play poker, and we'd go there. We'd have dinner at Carl's, and we'd go across the street from Motor City. Carl's is old school steakhouse. They bring their relish tray. And it's a lot like Michael's was. If you've ever been there at Bill's Casino on the Strip. Very, very nice place. And we were concerned that, oh boy, with the casino going up, is Carl's going to change to become glitzy? Is it going to go Hollywood? And is it going to lose that old-time steakhouse Detroit flavor? And 6 months later, it was done. It couldn't make it. And this was right across the street from the Motor City Casino. Today, you could stand where Carl's was, and you'd have to walk a half a mile to buy a pack of cigarettes or a bottle of pop. There is nothing around these casinos. Mm-hmm. Not one thing has been generated. Not one restaurant, retail establishment, or housing. In fact, Carl's couldn't make it, nobody would make it. One of the real disappointments that was supposed to really be the benefit of the casinos. Detroit was on horrible times, and the casinos were going to be not the savior, but thought it was going to be a real impetus to kind of turning the city around. But the city is worse and worse. Population was being lost. At one time, Detroit was the 4th largest city in the United States. Today's population is probably less than 700,000, but it's just kept going down. People moved out of the city. It was terrible. You can't believe the amount of abandoned homes and buildings that were just, it looked like a war zone. And their problems were 43% of the homeowners in Detroit didn't even pay their taxes. There was no money to come in. To balance the budget every year, they would write more bonds and go deeper in debt. And it was really a horrible situation. 1/3, hard to believe, but 1/3 of the city budget was paying retirees' pensions. They were so high because they were so generous over the years. You'd have people, cops that would retire after 30 years, and they'd be in their 50s, and they'd go work for a suburban outfit and tremendous pension benefits. And everything was killing. And so the casinos were a help, but it couldn't save Detroit. Greektown actually went bankrupt in 2008. Their problem was they were doing okay as a casino, but they were building a hotel. And one of the proposals was that people had to build a hotel with their casino. And they're usually about 400 rooms. Now, Greektown had trouble financing their 400 rooms, and they went under. Even though the casino was making money, other mismanagement caused them, you mentioned the casino, and they had good money, revenue coming in, but they couldn't make it. And the city of Detroit was just going deeper and deeper in problems. Finally, the city of Detroit declared bankruptcy. I mean, it was a huge thing, a huge major city declaring bankruptcy, and it made such a mess. Now, you can't believe the amount of litigation went on with the Detroit bankruptcies because I'm an attorney, and it was the Detroit firm. Every Detroit firm was getting well and representing the various interests. Everybody was pulling every which way, so that when the bankruptcy judge were going to finally make some rulings, whose ox was going to be gored the most. So everybody had an interest in trying to save some money. You had the unions, you had banks all over the place. That the city of Detroit was so much in debt, and the bankruptcy was going to be such a mess. People wondered how in the world is Detroit ever recover from this, because people were just going to get lost. The biggest concern was the pensioners, the retirees. This was an unfunded pension they were under. And a lot of the thing was, how much are they going to lose in their pensions? That was a really big deal. And the creditors, banks were owed, $100 million, and they wanted their money. And all kinds of issues came up. The city of Detroit's biggest asset was the casinos, the revenues they were getting with them. But they had another asset. They had the Detroit Institute of Arts. It's a world famous art museum with incredible works in there. And the creditors actually tried to force the city of Detroit to sell artwork. Say, hey, that's your asset. We want our money back. So it was a huge mess. And fortunately, again, Detroit had a federal judge, Gerald Rosen, who was assigned the bankruptcy case. And he decided that he was going to make a grand bargain. He called everybody, and he cajoled, and he pressured, and he finally came up with an agreement that would get Detroit out of bankruptcy. And there was all kinds of litigation you just can't imagine. The city of Detroit spent $178 million working out this bankruptcy. And this was attorneys and appraisers and consultants and turnaround companies. And the firm I was with got a nice chunk, but you can't believe some of the chunks that the people got. Jones Day, if anybody's from Cleveland, it's a big law firm in Cleveland. They had they did most of the work for the Detroit bankruptcy. And because the bills were paid by the city of Detroit, it was all over the newspapers. People were aghast at what the attorneys were being paid in these bankruptcy proceedings. Attorneys from Jones Day were getting $1,000 an hour. There were consultants that were friends of mine that had a consulting firm that did a lot of appraisal turnover. How can we turn the city around? This type of thing. $178 million over a couple of years, because everybody was fighting about whose going to lose money and who's going to get some money out of any kind of assets that there might be from the city of Detroit. Finally, there were some ownership changes in the casinos. After the bankruptcy was cleared, we were hoping Detroit would get back on their feet because Greektown went bankrupt. The concern was the other people might be going bankrupt too. Is are they going to be able to make a go of these Detroit casinos? This is Marion and Mike Illich. They bought the Motor City Casino. There was actually paid $1 billion for the casino. Mike Illich owns the Detroit Tigers and the Detroit Red Wings, and he founded Little Caesars Pizza, multi-billionaire, and he died. And Marion Illich now is the owner of Motor City. She owns virtually the entire casino.
Question.
Yes.
I was to understand she was the original owner, because since he owned two sports, he was not allowed to own a casino.
She was she was actually the owner, you're right. It wasn't him. Of course, it's family enterprise, Little Caesars Entertainment and what have you, but you're right. She was the owner in name because of his franchises. Now, what happened was they were fortunate. By this time, the Mirage, or Mandalay, and finally MGM had the Caesars Motor City interest in this. And in Detroit, one casino company can't own 3 casinos. So when MGM bought out the Mirage and the Mandalay, they had to sell one of their casinos. And there was a big bidding war. Were they going to sell the MGM in Detroit, or were they going to sell the Motor City in Detroit? Ultimately, sold the Motor City to Marion Illich. Mike Illich died a few years ago. She's a real Detroit booster, of course. This is Don Gilbert. Don Gilbert is, he started Quicken Loans, and he dabbled in a few casinos, and he bought the Greektown Casino out of bankruptcy. The Indian tribe needed money, and he screwed up this thing with building the hotel, and it was right for this fellow to buy. So he bought the Greektown Casino, and he owned pretty much the whole thing. Real Detroit entrepreneur. He Quicken Loans and his companies employ 17,000 people in the city of Detroit. He's bought numerous buildings in Detroit, refurbished them. A real renaissance man for the city. Very fortunate to have him. And he was investing so much money in Detroit, he had an opportunity to sell the Greektown Casino. He just sold it last month for $1.1 billion to Pennsylvania Gaming Company. So we don't know if they're going to make any changes in the casino or not, but the fact that he sold it for $1 billion shows that the casinos are healthy. Detroit tried to go on the move. They've always tried certain things, and the casinos are helping. This is Super Bowl 40. If you would have been in Detroit in the Super Bowl when it was here in Detroit, you would have seen a different city than it was 2 months before the Super Bowl. Months before this game went on, they refabricated a bunch of storefronts in Detroit. They cleaned up the whole area. Everything around this Ford field where the Super Bowl was cleaned up. Actually, fake establishments were put in there so it wouldn't look like Detroit was a desolate company. And actually, Detroit put on quite a show. What's amazing about Detroit and its comeback is that the revenue of casinos, if you look, here we're talking from 2004 to 2015, the horrible recession years, the revenue hardly went down. And everybody was really surprised by that because when Greektown went bankrupt and the city of Detroit went bankrupt, everybody was very concerned that the casino revenues were just going to fall down. But they've actually stayed pretty consistent. what's even more amazing about that is, you know, everybody that's in Las Vegas this week, all the people you see at the airport, in the casinos, walking around with entertainment, in a week, it'd be almost a whole new different set of people. You know, the turnaround, this is weekly here. In Detroit, 90% of the people that frequent the casinos live within 100 miles of Detroit. It gives you an idea how many people are in the Detroit area, about 4.5 million, to support 3 casinos. Because people aren't coming into Detroit to gamble. If they want to go and entertain themselves, they're not going to go to Detroit. We are now at record revenues. The Detroit casinos are bringing in more money than they ever brought in before. And they're all popular. The MGM Detroit makes more money per square foot than any of the other MGM casinos. Name 13 of them in the United States. Imagine that. More profitable than all of them by per square foot. And it's important for the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan. They split 18% of the gaming wins. The city of Detroit gets 55% of that. So about $180 million a year goes to the coffers of the city of Detroit, just from casinos. That's why it's the biggest asset. State of Michigan is going to change too. And this is before you get all of the people that are working in casinos. About 12,000 people working in the casinos. And anybody that works in the city of Detroit pays a 2% income tax. So that's money to the city. If you live outside of this, it's 2.4% actually. If you live outside of the city and work in Detroit, you pay 1.2%. So all of these people are really contributing to the city of Detroit. Oh, I lost it in here. I wanted to give a little bit about what is happening in Detroit, because we do have a lot of money being pumped into buildings. If you come to Detroit, you'd be impressed with the casinos. If you like to gamble, they've got great restaurants. They have a lot of entertainment, brand name entertainment. And Detroit is on the way up. Now, one of the things about the casino revenue, I want to talk about this. You can see it's about $1.38 billion. This is the casino revenue. If you took the Wynn Casino, for instance, they make $600 million a year in gaming. But they also make $600 million a year on their hotel operations. And they make about $350 million a year on their retail and restaurants. It's such a huge thing. Now in Detroit, we have 400-room hotels. We don't have the turnaround of the people. So everything here is a profit center. In Detroit, it's all got to be made from the casino floor. If you go to Detroit, there's a lot of things to see in Detroit. You go to the Motown Museum, the Detroit Institute of Arts is a world-class museum, the Detroit Historical Center. You could go to Henry Ford, which is a world-class museum, and from there you can go to an auto factory. Ford Rouge plant is open for visitors. You can go in and watch them make trucks. It's an eye-opener. When I was going to school, I worked at the auto companies in the summertime. And, you know, you were elbow to elbow with people working on the cars. Now it's people in lab coats watching robots do a lot of the work. But it's an interesting thing to see if you're ever in Detroit. You can also go to Lafayette, Coney Island. You get a Coney Island, which you can't get anywhere else other than the deed. It says that they sell them down there. If you go into the deed down in the corner there is a Coney Island restaurant, which is a hot dog with trimmings on it, Detroit style, and they're pretty close. But not quite Detroit. I'm a hometown Detroiter, proud of the city. It is moving. They're building condominiums downtown. The people are moving there. The younger people want to move down there. The business area is growing. The auto companies are relatively healthy. And I would encourage you, if you visit Detroit, to see what's around there, you'll see a city on the move. That's my presentation.
Thank you.
Yes, you have questions?
It was very interesting. During the evolution, either when it was getting approved, the initiatives and voting, et cetera, and then the casinos themselves, did the auto industries take a stand pro or con
No.
casinos? Or?
Not really. The auto companies were having so many of their own problems. They had the 2 bankruptcies out there before, and everybody thought the whole area was going down when the city of Detroit went down. I'm amazed. If you polled the people now, they would say yes, the Detroit casinos were a good idea. With the influx of cash and bringing people downtown, even the churches, some of these people that were part of the investors were actually some of the church people. You've got people that were pastors of churches that got a half a point in the casino and it's worth $500,000. So the people recognize that the influx from the gaming, $180 million a year, and all the employment they have, I think you would find it's a very positive effect. People are saying, well, the people in Detroit can't afford it, they're losing. But it's not the people in Detroit that are making these billions of dollars. It's the people from the suburbs that are coming in. So I'm sure that if it was an experiment, the people would say that it was well done, well worth it for the city. But again, where was this paradise? It was going to be defiled by these things. It just wasn't there. Yes.
Like you, I used to practice bankruptcy law, and we kind of followed this case and were aghast at the fees as well. My question is, was the city able to reject the pension contracts and get out of all of that? And does that help the recovery, or how'd that work out?
Well, what's so astounding, and nobody would have predicted this, the retirees only lost 4% of their pensions. And you had banks losing hundreds of millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
The Detroit Institute of Arts was so afraid of losing some of their gems that they actually paid $100 million to nobody would touch their assets. That's how well they are endowed. So we attorneys looked at these bills, and it was just crazy. I mean, you had the pensioners had a team of lawyers to protect their money. You had the banks had a team of lawyers to protect their money. And then you had all of these contracts that were being stiffed. And Gerald Rosen, I'll even back up further. There was a real issue whether or not it was legal for Detroit to declare bankruptcy. There were various court decisions. And Judge Rosen, federal judge, said, listen, I'm going to put this on hold. And he just strong-armed everybody. And, of course, that's what it took. You had to bring people in and threaten them. But, people were getting, if you got 10 cents on the dollar, you were lucky. But somehow those pensioners did all right. They hardly lost anything. It was very unusual because, like when GM went bankrupt, I know a lot of people, of course, everybody in Detroit works for the auto companies, and some GM executives took a horrible hit on their pensions in their bankruptcy.
Well, how has Detroit been able to thrive if they have the same pension burden they had going in?
Well, they cut them back. There's a thing called the 13th month. They had 1 year they were a little bit flush with money, so they gave every one of the pensioners a 13th month benefit, and it stuck for 20 years. And here they were borrowing money to pay these things. And if you took the money that they were paying on pensions, 45%, and the money that they were paying on borrowing to pay those pensions, in the day when people thought municipal bonds were golden, it's absolutely astounding that Judge Rosen was able to clear up this whole mess, because what a mess it was. And now the city of Detroit is, thanks to the casinos, and of course there's tremendous state aid, it's always going to the city to run things. And they had an emergency manager during bankruptcy who had a lot of authority, and he was throwing things out left and right. And these people didn't know how to run a city, and they just ran it into the ground. Now, there's a Michigan watchdog on it because of the bankruptcy. And you can't say they're healthy. The schools need more money and everything else, but they're doing okay.
Thank you.
The spiral of the flushing of the toilet is going the other direction now in Detroit. It's coming, it's getting healthier, it's getting stronger. Everything's coming back a little at a time. The amount of land is so large, there's so many neighborhoods that are still not touched.
You know, it's funny, Dave Bing, when he was a businessman, he made a proposal that everybody scoffed at, but he was absolutely right. He said, we should take all the citizens of Detroit and pay for them to move into one area. And we would just bulldoze the rest of the areas. And everybody scoffed at that. And the problem was, if you ever run through Detroit, any city block has half the houses just bulldozed, they're not there. And then half of what's remaining, they're abandoned or drug dens or just dilapidated. So you got this wide area with only pockets of people living there. And it would have been cost efficient to move everybody out and put them in one area. Clean it up, give good service to that area and that type of thing. But, you know, of course they never did. In Detroit, there are only about 3 areas where it would be very desirable to live in. And every place else is just totally undesirable. But it's coming back. They're actually building condominiums down in Detroit. There are cranes up in the air. If you went there, you'd be very surprised. Some of the old buildings, office buildings that were vacant for 30 or 40 years, are now thriving. They've been gutted, and Dan Gilbert put money into them.
Train station.
The train station, there's this old icon, Michigan Central Station in Detroit, that's a beautiful edifice, gone to disrepair. Ford bought it, and they're cleaning it up. They're going to make it majestic, I believe, and they're going to have some of their offices in there. And you're seeing that all over the city. We've got a new hockey arena where the where the basketball team is also going to play, and contiguous hockey, baseball, and football all in one particular area. It spawned a lot of theater. Nice restaurants in Detroit, clubs. It's on the move. And it was rock bottom at the bankruptcy. And now there's a lot of reason for optimism. And it wouldn't be done without the infusion of money from the casinos and the employees working for the casinos. They're good paying jobs, and those people are all paying taxes. And I think things are looking up. We'll probably be getting another Super Bowl pretty soon. The first time they had a Super Bowl in Detroit, who would go to a northern city? And William Clay Ford, the grandson of Henry Ford, called up Pete Rozelle and said, you know, Pete, I had my advertising people coming in here today. We're going over some numbers, and you know, Detroit Auto Company spent an awful lot of money on NFL football programs, and hey, where's the next Super Bowl going to be? So he strong-armed him to come to Detroit, and he did it again for Super Bowl 40. And we've got NCAA Final Four coming. Detroit, it's on the move. I encourage anybody to go to any big city. My wife and I, every year we go to a big city that we don't really know. I've been here in business. Philadelphia, Boston, Washington, D.C. We've been to Dallas, Houston, San Antonio. And if you go to a city, and we always spend 4 days there, we look at TripAdvisor, what are we going to see? Every place we filled up 4 days. If you came to Detroit, you'd fill up 4 days looking at what's to be seen, and you would enjoy it.
Belle Isle.
Belle Isle, you wouldn't believe Belle Isle. And I said, it's this park that the city of Detroit owned, and the state took it over, and again, the outcry. But it was just, it was horrible. And now it's coming back. The state owns it. They even got that fountain running again.
Fountain's running. The aquarium is up and open and free.
Little zoo there. You can rent a canoe and go canoeing, and
the Maritime Museum's in there.
Yeah,
they run the Detroit Grand Prix there every year.
Right on the island. It's terrific.
Right on the island.
It's a beautiful view of the city from Belle Isle, from the island. It's just off there. And I tell you, go there on a sunny afternoon, And the, sounds racist, but the black people out there having their barbecues, just roll down your windows, and boy, I'll tell you, that is the place to be on a Sunday afternoon. Very festive, very safe now. There's 2 yacht clubs on there. Used to have a client who used to belong to the yacht club. He'd like to go to lunch there, and I'd take him there. And geez, you had to run like a gauntlet of just a mess to get there. You know what a yacht club is. And to get there was one way. You had to go all around the island. It was filthy. You had junk all over the place. Now you go there and you'll see families picnicking all over. The whole city is coming up to speed that way too. So this is Detroit.
Thank you.
Thank you.